Tyrone Jefferson was just trying to make his rent money with late-night Uber rides when he heard the muffled screams coming from the trunk of the black Mercedes speeding through downtown Atlanta. What he did next would change his life forever and shock one of America's wealthiest families with a request they never saw coming. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday when Tyrone's 2009 Honda Civic pulled up to the red light at Peachtree and 14th Street. He had been driving for 11 hours straight, desperately trying to earn the $400 he needed to keep his electricity from being shut off. At 34, Tyrone worked 3 jobs: Uber nights, construction days, and weekend security at a mall. But it was never enough. The black Mercedes S-Class pulled up beside him, windows tinted so dark they looked like mirrors. Tyrone wouldn't have paid attention to another rich person's car, but then he heard it. A faint but unmistakable sound of someone banging against metal, followed by what sounded like muffled crying. He rolled down his window and listened more carefully. The sounds were coming from the trunk of the Mercedes. Tyrone's military training from his 2 tours in Afghanistan kicked in immediately. Those weren't random noises. Someone was trapped in that trunk, and they were in distress. The light turned green, and the Mercedes accelerated quickly, taking a sharp right onto Spring Street. Tyrone made a split-second decision that would change everything. He canceled his current ride request and followed the Mercedes, staying far enough back to avoid detection, but close enough to keep visual contact. For 20 minutes, he followed the car through Atlanta's late-night streets, his heart pounding as the reality of the situation set in. This wasn't some movie. This was real life, and someone's life was potentially in danger. The Mercedes finally pulled into an abandoned warehouse district in southeast Atlanta, an area Tyrone knew well from his construction work. These were the kinds of buildings that had been empty for years, perfect for activities that couldn't stand daylight scrutiny. Tyrone parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, using skills he'd learned in military reconnaissance. Through a broken window, he could see 3 men inside the warehouse, and his blood ran cold when he realized what he was witnessing. The girl they pulled from the trunk couldn't have been more than 16 or 17. She was well-dressed, obviously from money, with blonde hair and the kind of clothes that cost more than Tyrone made in a month. But right now she looked terrified, tied up and gagged as the men discussed their plans. "The old man will pay anything to get his precious princess back," one of the kidnappers said, his voice carrying clearly in the empty space. $20 million is just the starting price." "Robert Ashford's got more money than God," another replied. "His tech company is worth billions. We could ask for $50 million and he'd pay it." Robert Ashford. Tyrone recognized the name immediately. Everyone in Atlanta knew about Robert Ashford, the tech billionaire who had built Ashford Systems from nothing into one of the world's largest software companies. His face was on magazine covers, his mansion was featured in architectural magazines, and his family was Atlanta royalty. And now his daughter was tied up in a warehouse while 3 criminals planned to ransom her life. Tyrone had 2 choices: call the police and hope they arrived in time, or take action himself. But he knew from his time in the military that every second counted in hostage situations, and these men looked nervous and unpredictable. He pulled out his phone and quietly dialed 911, whispering the warehouse address to the dispatcher. But as he watched the kidnappers pace around their victim, one of them pulled out a gun and started waving it around, clearly agitated. "I don't like this," the gunman said. "Too many things can go wrong. Maybe we should just take the money and eliminate the witness." Tyrone's blood went cold. He couldn't wait for police. This girl was going to die if he didn't act now. Using skills he'd hoped never to need again, Tyrone worked his way around the warehouse perimeter, looking for advantages. There was a loading dock door that was slightly ajar and a stack of construction materials that would give him cover. The military had taught him that the best rescue operations relied on surprise and speed. He had one chance to get this right. Tyrone slipped through the loading dock and positioned himself behind a concrete pillar about 20 feet from where the kidnappers were holding Emma Ashford. He could see her clearly now. She was conscious, terrified, but alert. Their eyes met briefly, and he held a finger to his lips, signaling her to stay quiet. The element of surprise was everything. Tyrone waited until two of the kidnappers were distracted, arguing about ransom demands. Then he moved. His first target was the man with the gun. Tyrone had learned in Afghanistan that you always neutralize the biggest threat first. He came up behind the gunman silently and applied a chokehold that rendered him unconscious in seconds, catching the gun before it could clatter to the floor. The other two kidnappers spun around, but Tyrone already had the advantage. "On the ground now," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded soldiers in combat zones. One of the men reached for something in his jacket, but Tyrone's military reflexes were faster. He fired a warning shot into the concrete floor, and both men immediately dropped to their knees with their hands up. "You have no idea what you're getting into," one of them snarled. "You're just some random nobody who's about to get himself killed." "Maybe," Tyrone replied calmly, keeping the gun trained on them while he used zip ties from his construction tool bag to secure their hands behind their backs. "But right now, this random nobody has the gun, and you're tied up on the floor." He moved quickly to free Emma Ashford, cutting her restraints with a utility knife. She was shaking but unharmed, and when he helped her to her feet, she looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of being gagged. "I thought I was going to die." "You're safe now," Tyrone said gently. "The police are on their way." It was then that Emma asked the question that would change everything. "What's your name?" "I need to tell my father who saved me." "Tyrone Jefferson," he replied, not thinking much of it at the time. The police arrived within minutes, followed shortly by paramedics and what seemed like half the Atlanta media. By dawn, the story was everywhere. Tech billionaire's daughter rescued by hero Uber driver. But Tyrone didn't stick around for interviews or photo opportunities. He gave his statement to police, made sure Emma was safely reunited with her family, and quietly went home to his small apartment, expecting his life to return to normal. He was wrong. 3 days later, there was a knock on his door. Tyrone opened it to find Robert Ashford himself standing in the hallway, flanked by two men in expensive suits who were obviously security. Robert Ashford looked exactly like his magazine photos, tall, distinguished, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that comes from being worth $9 billion. But there were dark circles under his eyes, and his usual composed demeanor seemed shaken. "Mr. Jefferson," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm Robert Ashford. I believe you saved my daughter's life." Tyrone nodded, unsure what to say. He had never been in the presence of anyone this wealthy or powerful, and it felt surreal. "May I come in? I need to thank you properly." Tyrone's apartment was nothing like the places Robert Ashford was accustomed to visiting. It was small, clean but sparse, with furniture from thrift stores and walls that needed painting. Robert seemed to take it all in without judgment, but Tyrone could see him processing the obvious signs of financial struggle. "Mr. Jefferson," Robert began, settling into Tyrone's second-hand couch. "I owe you a debt I can never repay. You saved my daughter's life at great personal risk. If there's anything at all, I can do for you, please tell me." This was the moment Tyrone had been thinking about for 3 days. He had saved the daughter of one of America's richest men, and now that man was offering him anything he wanted. Most people would ask for money, a job, maybe help with their debts. But Tyrone had been poor his entire life, and he had learned something that Robert Ashford, despite all his wealth, had never experienced. He understood the difference between charity and justice. "There is something," Tyrone said quietly, "but it's not what you're expecting." Robert leaned forward. "Name it. I want you to hire my daughter." Robert blinked, clearly confused. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Your daughter? How old is she? I could arrange for college scholarships, internships." "She's 12, Tyrone said, his voice steady. "And she's dying." The silence that followed was profound. Robert's expression shifted from confusion to something deeper, a recognition that this conversation was about to go somewhere he hadn't anticipated. "My daughter Aaliyah has leukemia," Tyrone continued. "She needs a bone marrow transplant, but our insurance won't cover the full cost. The treatment she needs costs $400,000. I've been working 3 jobs for 2 years trying to save that money, but at this rate, she'll be dead before I can afford to save her life." Robert's face had gone pale. "Mr. Jefferson, I can write you a check right now for any amount you need. The money is nothing to me." "I don't want your charity," Tyrone said firmly. "I want to earn it. I want you to hire my daughter." "I don't understand. She's 12 years old." Tyrone stood up and walked to a small desk in the corner of his living room. He returned with a thick folder filled with drawings, sketches, and what looked like architectural plans. "Aaliyah designed these," he said, spreading the papers across his coffee table. "She's been working on them from her hospital bed. She calls it the Healing Center, a hospital specifically designed for kids with cancer." Robert examined the drawings more closely, and his expression began to change. These weren't the simple sketches of a 12-year-old. They were sophisticated architectural concepts with detailed floor plans, innovative patient room designs, and thoughtful consideration of how spaces could be designed to promote healing and reduce anxiety. "She researched everything," Tyrone continued. "Child psychology, medical equipment requirements, even the psychological effects of color and lighting on sick children. She wants to be an architect when she grows up, specializing in healthcare facilities." Robert was staring at the designs with genuine amazement. "These are remarkable. She did all this herself." "Every night after chemotherapy. She says that if she has to spend so much time in hospitals, she wants to help design better ones." Tyrone's voice caught slightly. "She says she wants to make sure no other kid has to be as scared as she is." Robert looked up from the drawings, and Tyrone could see that something fundamental had shifted in the billionaire's understanding of what was happening. "Mr. Jefferson, what exactly are you proposing?" "Ashford Systems has a architectural design division, right? You work with firms that design your corporate headquarters, your data centers?" Robert nodded. "I want you to hire Aaliyah as a consultant. Pay her $400,000 to develop a comprehensive design proposal for pediatric cancer treatment facilities. She'll earn the money for her treatment by doing what she loves most, designing spaces that could help kids like her." Robert was quiet for a long moment, studying the drawings spread across the table. When he looked up, there was something new in his eyes. Respect. "You're not asking for charity," he said finally. "You're asking for your daughter to be valued for her talents." "Exactly. I saved your daughter's life because it was the right thing to do. But I won't take your money as a handout. If my daughter's going to survive, she's going to earn her survival by contributing something meaningful to the world." Robert stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the modest neighborhood where Tyrone had raised his daughter. When he turned back, his expression was different. Not the polite gratitude of a wealthy man paying a debt, but the genuine respect of one father recognizing another's strength. "Mr. Jefferson, I'd like to meet your daughter." 2 days later, Robert Ashford walked into the pediatric oncology ward at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, a place he had donated millions to over the years but had never actually visited. He found Aaliyah Jefferson in room 314, sitting up in bed with drawing supplies spread across her bedside table, working on what appeared to be detailed ventilation system diagrams. She looked up when he entered, and Robert was struck by how much strength and intelligence he could see in her 12-year-old eyes, despite the obvious effects of chemotherapy. "You must be Mr. Ashford," she said politely. "Daddy told me you wanted to see my hospital designs." "I did indeed," Robert replied, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "I've been in the construction business for 30 years, and I have to tell you, your work is some of the most thoughtful architectural planning I've ever seen." Aaliyah's face lit up. "Really? I've been thinking about how the rooms could be designed to make kids feel less scared. Like, what if the ceiling tiles were actually LED screens that could show blue sky and clouds, so kids lying in bed could feel like they're outside?" For the next hour, Robert listened as this 12-year-old girl explained concepts that professional architects twice her age had never considered. She talked about sound-dampening materials that would reduce the frightening noise of medical equipment, about room layouts that would give families privacy while allowing medical staff easy access, about healing gardens that could be accessed from patient rooms. But what impressed Robert most wasn't just her technical knowledge. It was her understanding of fear, hope, and healing from the perspective of someone who was living through it. "Aaliyah," Robert said finally, "I'd like to offer you a position as senior consultant on pediatric healthcare facility design with Ashford Systems. The position pays $400,000 annually, with full medical benefits." Aaliyah's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Completely, but I have one condition." Her expression became cautious. "What's that?" "After you get better, I want you to oversee the construction of the first Aaliyah Jefferson Healing Center. We're going to build it, and it's going to revolutionize how we think about pediatric cancer treatment." Aaliyah started crying, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that her survival was no longer a question of whether her father could earn enough money in time. She was going to live, and she was going to use her talents to help other children like her. Robert stood up to leave, but Aaliyah stopped him. "Mr. Ashford, why are you really doing this? I mean, I know Daddy saved Emma, but you could have just given us the money and been done with it." Robert thought for a moment before answering. "Because your father taught me something about the difference between charity and respect. He didn't want my money. He wanted your talents to be valued. That's the kind of integrity I wish I had learned at his age." 6 months later, Aaliyah Jefferson was in remission, her bone marrow transplant having been completely successful. The experimental treatment protocol she had received was the best available, paid for through her consulting fees from Ashford Systems. But the real transformation had happened to Robert Ashford himself. Meeting Tyrone and Aaliyah had shown him a kind of dignity and strength that his wealth had never been able to buy. He had spent his entire life believing that money solved problems, but Tyrone had shown him that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse charity and demand to earn your way forward. The first Aaliyah Jefferson Healing Center broke ground 18 months later, designed entirely by its 12-year-old namesake, with input from child psychologists, medical professionals, and most importantly, young cancer patients themselves. Robert Ashford stood beside Tyrone Jefferson at the groundbreaking ceremony, watching as Aaliyah, now healthy and vibrant, explained her design concepts to a crowd of medical professionals and journalists. "You know," Robert said quietly to Tyrone, "I thought I was the one doing you a favor that day." Tyrone smiled, watching his daughter passionately describe how healing gardens integrated with patient rooms could accelerate recovery. "Maybe we both got what we needed." "What's that?" "You needed to remember that money isn't the same thing as value, and I needed to remember that my daughter's life isn't charity. It's an investment in a future that's going to be better because she's in it." Robert nodded, finally understanding what Tyrone had known all along, that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in dignity, purpose, and the ability to contribute something meaningful to the world. 3 years later, the Aaliyah Jefferson Healing Center had become a model for pediatric cancer treatment facilities around the world. Aaliyah, now 15 and cancer-free, was already being recruited by top architecture programs, with full scholarships from universities that wanted to claim the teenager who had revolutionized healthcare design. Tyrone still drove for Uber sometimes, but now it was by choice rather than desperation. He had used his reward money from Robert, not charity, but payment for consulting work he had done on Ashford Systems' security protocols, to start a non-profit organization that connected skilled tradespeople with volunteer opportunities at children's hospitals. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in Robert Ashford himself. The billionaire who had once believed that wealth was the measure of a person's worth had learned from a broke Uber driver that the most valuable things in life, courage, integrity, and love, couldn't be bought at any price. The night Tyrone followed that Mercedes through Atlanta's dark streets, he thought he was just trying to help a kidnapped girl. He had no idea he was about to teach one of America's richest men the difference between having money and having worth. Sometimes the most powerful act isn't asking for what you need. It's demanding the chance to earn it. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't your money, but your respect for their dignity and their refusal to accept anything less than what they deserve. If this story of courage, dignity, and the true meaning of wealth touched your heart, Remember that real power doesn't come from what you can afford to give away, but from recognizing value in places where others see only need. The most important rescues aren't always the ones that make headlines. Sometimes they're the ones that save someone's belief in their own worth. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.